We have few enough people that I'm sharing my screen, so I haven't quite mastered looking at chats and sharing screen and things like that. So just speak up, or like somebody let me know if there's a question. I really want this, rather than like talking about an inquiry-based, student-empowered approach where we talk at you for full time. I would much rather it be a conversation. So feel free to stop me at any point. I'm thrilled to be here. My name is Ace Parsi. As of last week, I am the Senior Director of Outreach and Dissemination for it's my longest title ever, Educating for American Democracy, and specifically working for the iCIVICS team on that. But I have served in this project since its beginning. So I was started on the steering committee and the pedagogy task force and the curation and implementation task forces. And it was always that job, position that like it was such a small part of my previous job, but it was the part that you always like look forward to finishing everything else off in order to get to the sport, because I think that so many of us sense this urgency of the moment. And I'll kind of speak through where I come at this work from. But this project, Educating for American Democracy, started about 1.5 years ago. And it was started by a joint grant between the National Endowment for the Humanities and the U.S. Department of Education. It was granted to these 5 organizations: Circle, which is the preeminent research organization for youth civic involvement; iCIVICS, which is the organization I currently work for, founded by Justice O'Connor, provides wide range of resources around civics and history education; the Edmund Safra Center, run by Danielle Allen. And I would say like Danielle and Safra Center, they probably look at civics and history a little, like, I think they're known anyway, from a little bit more of left of the side of the spectrum. The Arizona State University School of Civic and Economic Thought and Leadership, probably a little bit more from the right, and then Tufts University, where Circle is based. So beyond that, we had over 300 scholars. We had education organizations: the American Historical Association, the Political Science Association, the National Council for History Educators, and the National Council for Social Studies. And I think what I didn't really realize, because I was a guest at the party and not so much a person organizing it, is I didn't realize at the time and didn't appreciate that this bringing people together around the civics and history was such a core part of this project. That there is a National Council for History Education, National Council for Social Studies, and civics and history often get separated. A big part of this project was integrating them and bringing them together. And then we had people across the political spectrum and ideological spectrum that participated in this project. What I don't have to share the slide, but I just included in here in terms of where we're starting from. We know that social studies has been marginalized for a very, very long time in terms of the amount of time spent on it. That has been consistently on the decline. And I tell my friends who are accountability hawks that if you could design a clear summative outcome of our civics and history failure, you would probably say insurrection, huge domestic unrest, challenge in terms of youth and people across the age, but especially youth, believing whether it's valuable to live in a democracy. So we are reaping really the seeds that we've sown in this field. And I think that the reason that I come at this work feeling particularly passionate about this moment of time is that so I immigrated from Iran, and I shared this with Charlie that when I was born in Iran, 2 of my uncles were in prison because they were part of the pro-democracy movement in Iran. And there's actually a story in my own family where the revolution in Iran came together by a collaboration of pro-democracy students and Islamists. And when the Shah was overthrown, the Islamist government came after the pro-democracy students. So there's a story in my family where young people where the police actually came into my grandmother's house, where 2 of my uncles were storing guns in a secret compartment in the bathroom, and the police found the room, the compartment, and the only thing that saved their life was that idea that they had this book on the counter just as a joke that was a pro-Shah book. And the government looked at that book and said, oh, these people are pro-Shah, we don't have to take them seriously. I say that because I know that right at this very moment while we're sitting here and doing this presentation, there are people all around the world that are just putting their lives on the line for democracy. And it's this gift that we have. And there's no human being in this country that's born and inoculated against authoritarianism. And so this is a gift that bears protection. So this is our moment to really elevate this discipline and make sure that our next generation does a whole lot better than we have done to strengthen it. We know also, the investment, again, and this is not to knock anything with STEM, but for every $50 we spend in STEM, we spend 5 cents on civics education in this country. There are 9 states that have no civic education requirements. And so this is our moment, in the same way that we think that Sputnik was a moment that raised the nation's conscience to focus on STEM education, that in the same way that we did literacy and math, and it really became that focus at Nation at Risk. This is our moment to really start thinking about, like, how precious do we think about our democratic foundation is, and how much are we willing to invest in its long-term sustenance. So what is it? So that's, I'm sure I didn't need to make any of those. The reason that you're here on a Sunday afternoon is you similarly believe in that. So what is educating for American democracy in this, and how does it play a role in some of these challenges that we've said? So one thing that I will share with it, as I mentioned, that this is if I had to define kind of the key elements of this roadmap, is one, that it is an integration of civics and history, that we believe that you can't have either really effectively without the other. History without civics is like just interesting nonfiction, and civics without history is a initiative, and I'm thinking without a foundation. So this initiative really brings those two areas together. It's thematic, and let me see if it's thematic. So there's these 7 themes. Theme 1 is civic participation. So how do individuals in our democracy participate in civic life? Who does, who doesn't? How has that changed over time historically? Our changing landscape, that this civic participation happens within physical space. How has that space changed? How has the landscape changed? And how has that affected civic participation for whom, at what points in history? The concept of we the people, who has been incorporated into that idea in that landscape, we the people, at what points in history? How has that changed over time? A new government and constitution, how have the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, our 3 branches of government, upheld or at different points curtailed the rights of we the people? And at what points in history have we seen that? The institutional and social transformation, civil rights movement, women's rights movement, the different ways that we have changed as a country, how have those institutional mechanisms either supported or impeded that, and at what points in time, and what does that say about where we are as a people today? I mentioned the people in the world and my own personal connection to that, but it's really, how does the American experience affect others around the world, and how does the experience of others around the world impact the American experience? And then to borrow from the Hamilton song, what comes next in contemporary debates and possibilities? How do we continue to perfect that union? And how do we learn from changes that have happened in our country in the past? So this is a thematic approach. It is K-12. So I have a kindergartner in the other room, and the pandemic forced me to become unwittingly into a homeschooling parent this year. And so next week, I'm going to start my daughter on educating for American democracy. There's kindergarten material, kindergarten through 2nd material, where we start laying that foundation. So, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But what it's also not, and it's important that it's not, because otherwise we would not be very good historians, is that this is not a curriculum, it's not a mandate, it's not standards, it's not a Common Core 2.0 in any sort of way. We have documents on the site where we talk about how this framework that I'm discussing plays into every single state standards, how it might align. And there are curricula, two of the organizations I usually like to highlight in this space is that the Bill of Rights Institute, which was founded by Charles Koch, David Bobb was a member of the bill of the steering committee of this, as was Facing History and ourselves. They're both doing a lot of collaborative work together. They think of their materials are different, but they all find a home within this broader umbrella of educating for American democracy. And then the other aspect of it that's really important, and I'll go over, is that it is an entirely inquiry-based approach to learning. And so that is important both for political reasons and also pedagogical. So politically, this is, as I mentioned, it's not standards, it's not curriculum. We don't have to get into those wars. Also, because it's an inquiry-based approach, and I'll go over some examples of these. There are progressive, moderate, conservative answers. And the whole point of this is that we want young people to engage in these questions, to own the answers of it, and to engage with them and people that they disagree with and still maintain a spirit of civic friendship and develop that, which is, my previous home was in Washington, D.C. I currently live in Morgantown, West Virginia. So I've moved from the bluest part of the country to the reddest part. And you don't have to go far beyond the Thanksgiving table, beyond their neighborhoods, to know that everything is becoming so polarized. So how do young people get those skills to be a people together? So what it includes are 7 content themes that I'll mention, the 5 design challenges, which I'll talk about, and 6 core pedagogy principles. We've also started by curating 200 some resources, and we're going to start adding to that again, of materials from all different sorts of providers that align with this on our website. And we have stakeholder briefs. So regardless of whether you're an educator or higher ed leader or researcher, whatever position you find yourself in, there's a way that we would love you to interact with this work. So I've mentioned the 7 themes, but I'll highlight here. I mentioned that this is an inquiry-based framework, so there's driving questions for history and civics for each of these, and supporting questions across these grade bands. And so I'll just go through one of these themes just to show what that is. So the institutional and social transformation, a series of refoundings that right now, particularly in a polarized environment, there is the debate of whether 1619 was the founding, 1776, and the reality is that in our country we've had a number of refoundings. So there are ways that the American experiment has continuously changed, and we need to explore those. So that's what this theme is about. You'll see in the overarching, these are the thematic questions, and see how they speak together. So is the American Revolution ongoing? What is a just society? How do we engage that? So there's a really gets you to think about what have our past been and how does it relate to the present? And then what are our rights and responsibilities within this area? And then when you look at this, so K2, you'll see kind of analyze why and how we communicate change and causes of change. So start to think about what is my role in my community? How do I engage in community in general? And then when you get into those higher grade levels, then it's similarly scaffolds. It's important because we don't thrust any of our students into high school geometry without any sort of mathematical foundation. We don't do that in literature, but we end up doing that often in civics and history. So the question with all those different themes is, what is the age appropriate level to examine them? And there is an age appropriate level that I'm going to go through with my kindergartner, and that's going to be very different than for those of us who have kids who are in the high school years, but they all can interact with this. And what's been actually really interesting is that there's been a lot of homeschoolers that have really liked this because they may have kids across different ages within the same household. So the driving questions here, how have different legal statuses changed? Just how we thought about in terms of how our country in general has changed. And then within the civics questions, what did the American Civil War and Reconstruction function as the Second American Revolution? So these are just some examples, but these are meaty topics. Like I would love to do a breakout room with any of you and just like hear your perspectives on this. I'd love to talk about this at a table with my dear friends. Now, mind you, my friends are history and civics dorks, but I think that it applies across different experiences. Then within that, one of the things that we realize is that we are in really fraught political times. And so people will have challenges with these different issues. And so we haven't made this a bug of the system. This is a real like design feature. So we've taken this design thinking approach in order to say, like, how do these tensions of teaching civics and history, how can we actually bake them in to how the experiences that students have, but in a way that they can engage in a civil way with some of these issues and know that there's just different answers, that there's not a multiple choice answer and you choose C on one of these. So how do we motivate the agency of the individual while sustaining a collective republic? How do we tell the plural story of America, including those stories of people that we don't often share in our history books, while we'll still have a collective American story? How do we simultaneously celebrate the benefits of compromise throughout our American history and through the present, and also critique the limitations of that compromise? How do we tell the challenging realities of our past without falling into cynicism, and highlight some of the great things that drew people like my family to this country without falling into adulation? How do we balance concrete and abstract ideas together within an educational experience? So these are baked in design challenges that we put in here. So you see that here in terms of civic honesty and reflective patriotism, there's how can we offer an account of U.S. constitutional democracy that is simultaneously honest about the wrongs of the past without falling into cynicism, and appreciative of that founding without tipping into adulation. And it tells you like what theme this really meaty question is really examined through. And then there are specifically, we had a pedagogy group of expert educators and scholars thinking through what are the approaches that we need to actually facilitate this. So the key pedagogy approaches, how do we maintain, ensure that we deliver this education in a way that honors everybody's story and honors what everybody brings in. I know we've worked with these two organizations just as an example, because I come from the disability community in my previous job, Emerging America and Learning Disabilities Association of America, that are taking these themes and applying it to the disability rights movement. How do we think about this in a similar way that we want our people to interact in our democratic institution through a growth mindset experience? That this is something that's going to be developing. It's not an endpoint that we are going to get to. None of us on this call are at that endpoint. We will never be at that point. We certainly don't want to be communicating that to our students. The balancing the EAD ready classroom and school, we don't want rogue educators. And we don't want top-down systems. So this is how do we set up a structure that educators feel fully invested in this work. Inquiry is obviously a core. If I had to say one idea that is core to what EAD is, I would be inquiry. That we think that the best way to learn is not to treat kids as receptacles to be filled with as many names and dates as possible, but that this is something that we develop through questions, and the skills that you develop in terms of having questions where people have different viewpoints but can discuss them civilly is a really important aspect of this work. The practice of constitutional democracy and student agency is simple, that we don't think that we prepare students with from democracy through a very top-down system. That ultimately the best way that students learn democracy is by engaging in systems where they have choice and agency, and that looks different for my kindergartner than it will when she's in 12th grade, but it's an important principle. And then that we assess learning. Let me see if I. So you can find all these materials at educatingforamericandemocracy.org. And let me see if I can just actually take it to the website, and I can show you a little bit just what's on there. I'm going to share my screen. So on the site, what you'll find here is the vision is everything in terms of what we are and who we are. But then when you go, you can look through this entire roadmap and explore it through an interactive roadmap section here that'll take you through each of these themes and the design challenges, just as I showed here. But then if you want materials that already are aligned to this work, we've had a curation team that's going to just actually start getting going again. So if you have materials yourself that you feel like align with these different questions and you want to submit them, we are thinking that this is one of the benefits is that we can have everybody in the country interacting with this and actually developing this and building it together. So the pedagogy companion is here. There's PD that we do monthly, but then you can explore by grade level, by theme, by design challenge, by driving question and resource type. If you are part of an organization and you want to engage in this work, we have a whole list of champions that are already included across the political spectrum: museums, education organizations, non-education organizations. In this page, we highlight, regardless of what your stakeholder is, you can best represents you, or if it's multiple, like what are some specific actions and news and events.
I want to just add, if one were to scroll down further on the champions list, one would find SSEC.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And so this is exactly kind of like the way that we engage with partners. We're grateful to have SSEC be a champion of this organization, knowing that SSEC's contribution may be different from a National Education Association or a CASEL or a Bill of Rights Institute. But what I've been incredibly heartened by and grateful, like if you think that there's we're living in a hopeless time for our democracy, this has been an incredibly hopeful project because of partners like SSEC to say, well, we do this conference and this is a great way for us to educate our people and how to think about how to bring them in. So this is the only way, this type of collaboration is the only way that we don't have this just be a report on the shelf. I would turn my computer right now and show you a lot of dusty reports on my shelf here that I have written that nobody, including my wife or daughter, my daughter, of course, but my wife, my parents have read. But the hope is the way that we make sure that this isn't just a static report that gathers this is how you will engage with this work. And so that's what the take action piece is about. We have events. We're slowing down on events a little bit right now because it's the summer, but for a while we were averaging 2 or 3 events a week. So that is this project. What I want to do now is I will pause just to answer any sort of question, but then I would love to like engage you in the conversation of what you think the possible next steps are, just coming into this work, not doing it every single day for this Educating for American Democracy, but doing your work. How do you see this aligning with your work? So let me pause and just answer any big overarching questions, and then we'll go into this Jamboard activity where we'll talk. I'll talk less at you, and we'll engage more in collaborative conversation.
I mean, talking about how I already use this with my elementary and secondary pre-service teachers. So we go and explore this site. We explore other things in iCIVICS. And I put in the chat, my pre-service teachers love the materials. They love the things that are on iCIVICS. So that's how I'm using it. And then when the students are doing anything civics related, like when they're designing curriculum civics related, I always really strongly suggest that they go and look, what does iCIVICS have? You know, what do you have? Okay, how do you mold it for your students? How are you going to change it? You know, make modifications, things like that. That's how I use it.
That's great. And Dean, what school do you teach at?
I'm at the University of Wisconsin, River Falls.
Great, great. So one of the things that we're hopefully going to do also by the beginning of January, and talking about like how different organizations are engaging, is one of our partners is the American Association of Colleges of Teacher Education. And we are actually, so if you wouldn't, I'll include my email, of course, for anybody who wants to follow up. But if you want to follow up, we're creating modules right now around how faculty can prepare their candidates for this. So I'd love to follow up with you.
Well, that'd be perfect. That'd be great.
Yeah.
I'll put my email in the chat.
Great. And it's so weird. I'm just started with this new email, so it's unnatural for me to use it, but great.
Let me also mention that some of you may know Peter Levine, who was the director of Circle for a long time. He's now the associate dean, or he's a dean
at Tufts.
And I was able to follow and participate in a little bit of the pre-research, or actually the pre-project research on this project. That this is the part where the scholars and practitioners were brought together, and it was very rigorously done, and that's over the past 3 or 4 years, I suppose, of work. So this is really the culmination of that. Peter Levine was was a keynote speaker when SSEC was in Salem, Massachusetts, and he presented at the Kennedy, the Edward M. Kennedy Center for the Senate, where we met. Just want to throw that in there.
Yeah, and Peter was a principal investigator of this project. I feel like in some ways, Peter has been the Forrest Gump of this high quality civics history movement. He's been part of like each of these efforts. And so this project would look, I don't know what this project would be without Peter Levine, but I am just incredibly grateful that I will never have to find out. So he's been an integral part of this work from the very beginning. Well, I'm happy to answer questions now, and also I'll open up some time at the end, but I'd love to, like, rather than continuing to talk at you, I'd love to engage you actually in your thinking on this. So I included a Jamboard into the chat. If we can go to that, let me go to it myself. Let me put this. So for those of you who haven't used Jamboard before, it just gives you the opportunity to take little stickies and write on them and put them on there so that we can all see. And so I see somebody's already putting in there. So just thinking about this in light of the present national context, the greatest strength and opportunity the roadmap invites that I'm most excited about is what is and because. So let's take a little bit of time just to get some of your ideas down there, and then we'll talk through that. And yeah, I'll wait and see like what you all come up with. And some of you may have, like Dean, have already interacted with this. Some may be coming brand new. Both of your reactions are very welcome. So if this is just a quick gut reaction to this that you're excited about, take it as that. If you've already been playing with it and you like part of it, you can go further. These are great. Mhm. So I see some really good thoughts forming. I think that one of the things that excites me is people already thinking a little bit about how their materials. So like, how do we adapt SSCC materials to support EAD? And that's like, you know, when you think about what a national community can be around something, rather than just the, you know, every single, you know, 1,000 different flowers blooming or wilting in different parts of the, like what it means to align a whole national system in terms of materials. Like people can cut, like there's going to be, obviously I've lived in Washington, D.C. I now live in Morgantown, West Virginia. I know that there's a very different context in terms of how we consume information and the histories that we, and so that those learnings are going to be very different, but that there are some certain core questions and themes and challenges that are going to be very similar in both environments, and that we as providers, we can devise different experiences around those, that we can have some sort of model materials that national experts, including those that are right now among you all, can vet, and you can know that it's quality. Seeing some work in terms of how do we guide a narrative of what we are as a people. I think that that's something that our country is really struggling with right now, is how do we ground our narrative? And that reality is like both sides have something to contribute to that conversation, that that we're building on students' different experiences. Anybody want to just, you know, we're a small enough group that we can, if you want to elaborate on something like that, if you're finding something part of this particularly exciting that you want to share, you can unmute yourself. We're a small enough group that we can do that. Anybody want to share a little bit more about what they put down and why they put it there?
I put a couple stickies, but one of the ones I added was the one near the bottom that says the various themes can set intentions for teachers and act as a guide. I'm a pre-service teacher right now, and so this, I know, speaking on behalf of others, can be intimidating and daunting, not knowing all the background information and whatnot. And so those themes allow me to kind of have a guide about what do I want students to get from these sources, what do I want them to take away from the conversation. And so I think those themes help set kind of a framework for teachers, especially new ones, trying to come up with an effective way to have a conversation.
Yeah, absolutely, Kelly. I think that one of the things that we hope is useful to pre-service teachers is that there's a framework and a map here, and then there's also some sample best practice resources. But the other thing is, like, when you're working on something and you're working on it for a really, really long time, you start to get tunnel vision. And so I think we love to invite new teachers, pre-service teachers, to come through and say, look, interact with us and say, like, how does this, like, what are the materials? You know, you can be part of a national community that develops materials to bring this. So this is only itself 3 months old. Like, you know, there was no EAD prior to March 2nd. So this is a very, like, we're building this really from the ground up right now. So absolutely. Anybody else want to share anything?
I'm a big proponent of starting conversations, and it seems like this material on here does an excellent job at starting these conversations.
Yeah.
And one of the things I found lately is people like to just spout out kind of thoughts,
Yeah.
and that's not a conversation, that's telling. And
Yeah.
one of the things that I really appreciated about this initiative with the roadmap is it really does allow that conversation to grow. So I appreciate that a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that, you know, for those of us, like, I have a very different political view than my older brother who lives in Pittsburgh. I live in West Virginia. So we see each other over the holidays. And, you know, I think that part of our experience that there's obviously these macro things, but the micro things is so much harder to, like, you know, start that conversation anymore if you have to buy it. So like that is inherently one of the goals of this, is how do we engage in conversations, knowing that, like, really there's not a yes or no answer to this, that there is actually merit in different views that come to this, and how do we engage in that conversation? And within the answering of the questions, how do we give the mental tool set to be able to, for our youth to be able to engage in that? So absolutely. So these are the opportunities, but this is not just like all, if we look up any sort of news site today, we will not see all roses here, and nor is anybody under the auspices that this is going to be an easy path. So I would love to kind of now explore the other end of that with you. So in light of what you're experiencing in your schools and the programs and work that you're doing, the biggest roadblock that the roadmap that gives you the most concern. So what's the biggest roadblock if we were to look at this 10 years down the line and we were to say that we've been successful, what roadblocks will we have overcome along that process? And why? Why do you think that is a roadblock that's important for us to overcome? Mm-hmm. Just starting with the small ones. Eroding faith in the democratic process. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we are, I think right now, you know, as a country, seeing this, just civics and history at this time, really entering into the culture wars. You know, there's, you know, critical race theories, obviously, every single day, a headline news and something. And so, like, the problem that it is, this roadmap is ultimately one designed to solve, is an inherent, like, the ultimate roadblock, because none of us have gone through this experience ourselves. Yep, alternative facts and alternative reality, truth. Yep. Yeah. Mhm. I think that is one of the, I mean, some of the things that you all are highlighting in terms of the current political environment is so totally dead on. So just to give you a quick sense of this, I mentioned that we're at a 1.5-year process in developing this roadmap. And so I remember the last time the steering committee for this effort met, I remember giving a presentation and everybody's eyes being glazed over, and I just thought at the moment, like, oh my God, I'm presenting on Zoom. I'm not really projecting my voice or something that's going on. And it was literally, I was giving a presentation as there was an insurrection happening on the US Capitol. It was January 6th. literally right at that moment that was happening. And then I remember actually that weekend, I was making a presentation to a group of iCIVICS fellows. These are youth fellows who were still in high school. I'm actually making another presentation to them today. So I'm really curious about how things may have even changed in the last few months. But they said, you know, like, our teachers never went over this. We never, like, think about this, like the first ever insurrection on our capital, and, you know, domestic insurrection on our capital. And how does that not enter into the conversation of what's happening in a school? And that's because everything has become so toxic and everything has become so radioactive. And so the hope in this is that partially by the fact that we highlight these tensions, that ultimately, like, parents have to, and school boards have to give the permission to teachers, that teachers need to know that somebody has their back, that they're going to engage in these conversations, they're going to do it thoughtfully, but that somebody, like, they can teach. And so that's a really, really important roadblock and challenge, especially in this moment. I mean, I think on the hindsight of it is that I think a lot of people sense this to be a problem on both sides of the aisle, and that they may, like, turn to this as a potential solution because it is a genuine and honest inquiry. But yeah, absolutely. Truth decay. Anybody, I mean, I know that there's a lot of, in terms of just like alternative facts and political untruths and things like that but anybody want to elaborate a little bit more on what you're, or either on that issue or anything else that you put on? I feel often that America is this book that you want to, like, just quickly, like, flip through to the end of the last chapter to see how it ends, but we just don't know how it's going to end. In that sense, like, I think it's that we have gone from an era where there were central sources of information, whether it's trusted news outlets or whether it was our political leaders. And, you know, this doesn't come with the social media era, but just everything from the Pentagon Papers and Watergate and different things that have happened in our country. So that the proliferation of people having a voice, I think, is very new, but at the same time, the lack of capacity to use that voice in an informed, empowered way, because we haven't taught it. And so the question, I think, ultimately for our moment is whether we go to a place where more people have a voice and power to affect the type of the country and people that we are going to be, but at the same time, our systems of education have not caught up in terms of actually empowering them to engage that voice in a civil way, in an empowered and an informed way. And so this, I think, is the ultimate, and whether the roadmap is the answer or part of that answer, or just the, you know, I think that's what we're going to be, I think, the ultimately reflecting back on in 10 years is, like, how do we make sure that that's an answer to that, to this current challenge? Anybody else want to add anything before we jump to that last slide?
One of the things I'm curious about that I when I was looking through this that I didn't see on here was about just teacher burnout, because it seems like this is going to be really on teachers, and I wonder if you've come across that at all.
Well, we're just starting it, and I think that we've experienced this on a few different levels. So, like, for example, we've had some national organizations that are just like, oh, I have to do we have social distancing, we have COVID and virtual and, you know, all these different things and vaccines, and there's just no time for us to do this. And so, for example, we have champions in there within this movement, like NEA and AFT, and I have not asked them anything to this point, because I just know that their members are so overloaded right now that it's not the right time to be asking them. I think that what we're feeling with this is that this is we're playing a long game on this, and the question is, how do we set the foundation to do that? So absolutely, like, there's going to be things in terms of burnout, like, you know, who enters the discipline, like who, not even because of the, like, right now, like, so many teachers feel like they're just, like, right there in the line of fire with this, with the culture wars now that have come into our classrooms. but also like what they're dealing with COVID. And so the question is like, how can we be a long-term answer and support to them? I don't think that this will be a system that is going to be more onerous. I mean, I think that there is a part of it that we need to, in a teacher prep, we need to effectively prepare candidates. We need to prepare the teachers to do inquiry, because there's a different sort of mindset to do that effectively. But I think ultimately it actually create, like, the fact that this creates a national community of practice opportunity and more like resources that are vetted. I think we're hopeful, whether that bears out, that this will be a help to teachers.
Hi, as an alumni of SSCC and a long history of my past of working in curriculum development, I love the fact that your pedagogy guide starts with the kindergartners and moving up. And I think that when you talk about the long-term game, that's where you have to start. And you have to pick, and it can be done. I loved working with teachers during my lifetime of work. I worked with American Bar Association for 10 years, directing the elementary and history. And I'm surprised they're not on here with your.
The American Bar Association?
They're in there somewhere.
Yeah, they are. They're a champion.
They should be.
They are. Yeah, they are.
But when you mentioned your kindergartner, that's exactly. And and I think it's also important that teachers of, say, high school understand what's happening at the kindergarten level, kindergarten through second grade, and look at that and say, oh, that's a foundation for what I'm going to be doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't think there's enough cross-fertilization.
Absolutely. Two anecdotes about that. So because of COVID, I mentioned that my wife and I have become homeschoolers. So I actually homeschool my daughter between 10 and 11 a.m. and I do a social emotional learning curriculum with her. And it is like striking because like my 11, like if you get a meeting with me at 11 right now, like maybe 11:05, because I'm usually scrambling to get to the computer back, but you're going to get a good version of me. Because I'm just like, it is like true that everything important you learn in life, you learn in kindergarten. Some of these skills and dispositions, and when you look at it, like that foundation of how we talk together, how we interact is really built in those early years. And so we just had an organization sign on as a champion, Playworks, and they actually come up with resources and materials for recess time. And like, so they're going to start to integrate these ideas and these questions into the resources that they create. Because it is, I mean, it's not, learning these ideals are not just like you sit in rows in a classroom and take notes and then spout that knowledge back off on an assessment. It's the question is, how do we teach it? What are the and that's why we take in the pedagogy companion, the environment, the authenticity of the environment very seriously.
Thank you. I'm glad to see this.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for your comment. Well, so let me, I'm going to put this last question on here for our time is, and again, this Jamboard will remain open. So if there's another idea that comes to you Monday morning, you can add it in here. And that's one of the things that we're doing is every single one of these things is an ongoing conversation. It's not the end of it. But so in reflecting on those two previous conversations, the action I may be able to take, yellow, or I'd suggest EAD take in green, to maximize the opportunities and reduce the potential obstacles is. So yellow for you, green for EAD. We are, I mean, this is one of our things that and we welcome collaborators. We're just starting to get into a mode where we're trying to bring all the organizations that provide professional development together. So we have, I think, like when I interact with teachers in schools, they tell me there's 3 things that they need. One is curricular materials. So that's the one we're hoping that we've already started to address and we're going to continue to address through a curation site. The second is assessments. And so we have a symposium coming up actually where it's not obviously going to be the end like answer to this, but the conversation with that ETS is leading to help identify like what is the assessments that support with this work that make this real. And then the third is like, how do we train our teachers to do this work? So that is that's the next nut that we really have to think about. How do we crack? So that's an excellent note in there that we're thinking about what we need to do more. Yes. And the next generation science standards is one of those. So we've started the conversation with the National Council for Teachers of English. They're starting to create modules right there around what English teachers can do, but would love to get into work with other disciplines. And, you know, I would say I just don't have a contact at the National Science Teachers Association, which is one group that I would love to engage in this, to think about like, how do these inquiries affect, like, can be incorporated into science. So we're starting with English, but would love to get into that discipline because it should not, this work is so important. It should not be just something that's included in one discipline.
Especially at the elementary level, because that's one of the things I hear from cooperating teachers I work with.
Yeah.
Is that the only time they're doing social studies is when my practicum students are in their class.
Yeah.
Because the practicum students have to do social studies.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm like, but there's so many great resources. And they're like, but the administration wants them to be doing literacy. They want to do literacy. And I'm like, social studies is literacy.
Yeah.
But it's making sure that it's really obvious to teachers.
Yeah.
How to do this, right? How to incorporate this. Otherwise, they're going to put social studies in its little box. They're going to put literacy in its box, and they're going to keep those boxes as far apart.
Yeah. Never shall the two meet. Yeah. I think that is where I think the teacher prep is also like, we teach these different disciplines within separate courses, right? Like, so I think we reinforce that at the earliest stage. So like, you really, like, when we think about what good education is, it's interdisciplinary, it's inquiry-based, all this, but you really have to actively push your mind to think about it in a different way, because inertia is going to take you the way that you've been taught and prepared, right? And so the question is, like, long term, we have to, if we're going to get this right, we have to change these institutions. So keep on including things in here. And thank you all, for those who were bold enough to start putting in some yellows. We do have to get more yellows in there as well. Like, how do you, and think about it. Think about how you want to engage in this work. If you have any organizations that, want to also engage in this, please have them get, let me just go to the Educating for American Democracy site. Where is it? On the site, there's a place for new partners to come on board. So champions, right here, if you're a new champion and want to be engaged, there's this form that you can fill out here. There's a number of different ways to engage in this work. But I see I'm at time. I just want to appreciate you all for coming in here on a Sunday. I often find these conversations, whether it's with partners or whether these presentations, to be a form of support group, and itself is an act of hope. Like, we know what's going badly. We want to invest in part of the solution. So thank you so much for engaging in there, because my kiddo and Dean's kiddo, they deserve to live in a democracy too. So so we hope that we give them something better than what we're having right now. So thank you so much for your time. I hope you have a great rest of the conference on Sunday.
Thank you so much, Ace. We really appreciate it. And his email is in the chat, and we can get his email to any of the rest of you who haven't gotten it if you'd like to create future connections. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, well, I am going to, speaking of, I've got a fiddle lesson with my daughter that I've got to go to. So I'm gonna
time.
Yeah, I'm gonna leave you all, but have a great rest of the conference. Thank you so much for inviting me. And
thank you.
Thank you for being partners in this work.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. And for the rest of you, the board meeting is next. So you can go to that separate Zoom link.